Good afternoon, Tracy. It's been one of those days. Sorry. I was about to start the devotional and got a phone call that I had to take. Um, so anyway, we'll wait. It's a little bit past 12, I know, but we'll wait just a little bit longer since this is an odd time. All right. Good afternoon, Tracy. It's been one of those days. Sorry. I was about to start. Give other people a chance to come in. Hopefully Thursday we'll be back on track at 10 a.m. I just had a 9:30 meeting, so I knew I wasn't going to get out of that before 10, and it ended up going to 11:30. So all good stuff, but just kind of hectic right now. I hope you guys are doing well. Philippians chapter 3 is where we will be today. The first 4 verses, really the first 3 verses, and then the first part of verse 4. And like weeks previous, this is kind of a two-parter for the week. We'll look at the whole section is really Philippians 3, 1 through 11, and we'll look at the first 4 verses today, and then the rest on Thursday, and make some applications about some things. We're really getting into a good part, I think, of Philippians. All of Philippians is good, but I think we're really now getting into the meat of it. But anyway, so let me begin with this story about Martin Luther. On October 31st, 1517, so a while ago, 1517, Halloween, October 31st, 1517, a priest by the name of Martin Luther nailed a paper outlining 95 theses he wished to debate with other Catholic priests. So that's actually what you would do. You kind of put, here's my grievances, and it was a form of protest, but he was asking to address 95 problems he had with the church that he wanted to talk about. These 95 statements criticized the indulgence and materialism of the church of his day. And that was the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. Most of Christianity that does not consider itself Catholic traces their roots back to Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. And so this is really how we got our beginnings. And I like to tell people today that we need to realize that the word Protestant means protestant. Protesting is in our DNA. Martin Luther died in 1546. On one occasion, in the middle of his controversy with the church, Martin Luther brooded for several days, falling into a state of deep depression. On one morning, when he was most deeply depressed, he came into the dining room for breakfast. His wife, named Catherine, was a former nun, and so Martin Luther was a priest, and he married a nun. But on this day, he comes into the dining room to eat breakfast, and he's very, very depressed. And so his wife, Catherine, greeted him attired in a black dress that you would wear to a funeral. Martin glanced at her quizzically. Finally, Martin said, "What's wrong, Catherine?" And Catherine replied, "God is dead." "That's a terrible heresy. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep," said Martin. "Never say that the eternal has died. When heaven and earth shall pass away, God will remain." And then Catherine said this, "Then why do you waken each morning with such a doleful expression on your face? Why go through the day sighing like the north wind? In your university classes, you claim to interpret the mind of God. You have appeared to know him well, and I became certain from the expression of your face that God must surely have expired." She made this statement without change of expression, and suddenly Martin Luther started laughing, and he said to her, "You have convinced me, dear. So if ever you see me again with a melancholy countenance, remind me that God is living, and that he will live forevermore." So, how are you feeling today? If you got a mirror nearby, take a quick look in the mirror. Based on the countenance of your face, would people conclude that God is dead or God is alive? From a prison cell, Paul was chained to a Roman soldier, yet he writes in Philippians 3, verse 1, "Finally, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord. It is no trouble for me to write the same things to you again, and it is a safeguard to you. The phrase rejoice in the Lord could be accurately translated rejoice because you are in the Lord, or rejoice because of what God has done for you. The word rejoice means to be glad. It means to thrive and to rejoice exceedingly. Our lives should be characterized by joy and happiness, not depression and discouragement. And on a side note, the last part of that verse, Paul says that it's no trouble for him to write the same things to them. And so apparently Paul had written other letters to the Philippians besides the one that we have in our Bible. On numerous occasions, Paul reminds the Philippians to rejoice. And again, from a Roman prison, he is writing these words. And so I am convinced rejoicing in the Lord is one of the most powerful weapons we have in our arsenal to keep the enemy at bay. When we rejoice, Satan cowers. When we don't rejoice, Satan pounces. And so be cheerful, rejoice. But how can we learn to rejoice in all things, especially when things may not be going the way we want them to? How can we learn to rejoice? Well, I think from Paul's words, and again, this entire section, which goes through verse 11, we learn how to set ourselves up for rejoicing. And so we learn 4 practical steps to take that will pave the way to a more cheerful life. 4 steps. And if you've been following along, you know what's going to happen. Today we will look at 2 steps, and then Thursday we will look at 2 steps. But 4 steps to help us be people who are no matter what we're going through, we're characterized by people who rejoice. So 4 practical steps to a more cheerful life. Number 1, stay away from negative people. This is extremely practical. If you want a life characterized by rejoicing, stay away from negative people. It's taken me a while to learn that, but I've slowly learned the importance of this lesson. And so to the Philippians, Paul says in verse 2, watch out for those dogs. So he's calling people names. Watch out for those dogs, those men who do evil, those mutilators of the flesh. I think in context, unfortunately, the people that Paul was talking about, the negative people that he wants us to stay away from, were people who were inside the church. The people referred to as dogs were known as Judaizers. These were Jewish Christians who believed Gentile Christians needed to live by the Jewish law, especially the law of circumcision, in order to be right with God. They were legalists. They were people who distorted the grace of God in favor of a list of rules and regulations. And so they were legalistic. They had bad attitudes, and they were negative about everything. And Paul had nothing good to say about the Judaizers, and he addresses them in almost every one of his letters. Nothing good to say. His advice to the Philippians was to stay as far away as possible from these people. Now, there are some people who suck the life out of a room the moment they walk in. And Paul is saying, don't let that type of person steal your joy. Don't let their misery become your misery. Don't join them in their gutter of despair. Don't wallow in their pit of despondency. Instead, Paul says, rejoice. And one step that we can take to rejoice in our life is to stay away from negative people. But here's the second thing he says if we want to rejoice more in our life. First, stay away from negative people. And second, place your self-esteem in Jesus Christ. Place your self-esteem in Jesus Christ. In contrast to the Judaizers, Paul reminds the Philippians in verse 3, for it is we who are the circumcision, we who worship by the Spirit of God, who glory in Christ Jesus, and who put no confidence in the flesh. Notice what he says. These Judaizers think that they're holier than thou. But in reality, it is we who are the true followers of Jesus. Our self-esteem, who we are, is wrapped up in Jesus, not us. And these 3 phrases that Paul uses here characterize a true believer. First, he says true believers worship the Spirit of God. He says, for it is we who are the circumcision. So we who are the true followers of Christ, we who worship by the Spirit of God. Worship is not an outward action as much as it's an inward attitude. True worship comes through the Spirit of God and is only possible by those who have placed their faith in Jesus Christ. Paul says your identity, your self-esteem is in Jesus. We are the true followers. We are the ones who worship God. And second, he says, true believers glory in Christ Jesus. A true believer knows that he or she has done nothing to earn salvation. It is all because of God's grace. Therefore, since it's because of Jesus and because of God's grace, only Jesus receives the glory. And so we are the circumcision. It is we who worship the Spirit of God, who glory in Christ Jesus. And then the third phrase he uses is, as a result of glorifying in Christ, true believers put no confidence in the flesh. In other words, I can learn to rejoice when I recognize that I am who I am because of Jesus. My self-esteem, my self-worth, my self-identity is not found in what I do. It is found in who I am in Jesus. And I'm preaching to myself here. Some of you may have heard me share over the last several months that I've had to confess that too much of my identity has been wrapped up in what I do. And Jesus has been trying to teach me, no, your identity is in your relationship with me, not in what you do. An American tourist in Paris who purchased an inexpensive amber necklace in a trinket shop in Paris was shocked when she had to pay quite a high duty on it to clear customs in New York. She didn't pay a lot of money for it, and then the customs was high. This aroused this person's curiosity, so he had it appraised. After looking at the object under a powerful magnifying glass, the jeweler said, "I will give you $25,000 for it right now." Greatly surprised, the man decided to have another expert examine it, and the second expert says, "I will give you $35,000 for this right now." So finally he said, "Well, what do you see in this trinket that is so valuable? What is so valuable about this old necklace?" The jeweler said, "Well, look through the glass." And when he looked through the glass, he noticed that inscribed on the piece of jewelry were the words, "From Napoleon Bonaparte to Josephine." The value of the necklace came from its identification with a famous person. The value of the necklace came from what was written on the inside. And likewise, as Christians, our value comes not from the outward, but from what is inside, mainly our union with Jesus Christ. That is where we find happiness and true peace, and that is where we find the ability to rejoice even in bad circumstances. We are identified with Christ. It's what's on the inside that makes us valuable. And so the first two of four principles that will pave the way for a more cheerful life is stay away from negative people. Some of you may need to hear that today. Stay away from negative people. And second, place your self-esteem in Jesus Christ. We are identified with Him. That is what makes us valuable. Have a good day.